You're standing in a corridor lined with velvet the color of sacramental wine. The torches cast shadows that writhe like penitents. Your wrists ache not from prayer, but from the silk cords that bound them an hour ago. You can still taste copper on your tongue, still hear the laughter echoing from marble mouths above. It's voices that should have offered absolution, but offered only appetite. The hands that dragged you here wore rings, blessed by the same authority that once promised your family protection. Now you understand. Protection was never the transaction. Silence was. Still can't wrap my head around how many of you are watching from every corner of the world. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Knowing this history reaches you, wherever you are, reminds me why these stories refuse to stay buried. What you just felt was not fiction. It was Tuesday in Papal Rome, sometime between 1492 and 1503, when the throne of St. Peter became a stage for appetites that would make Caligula blush. The man who occupied that throne was Rodrigo Borgia. Pope Alexander VI, and the system he perfected had been centuries in the making. This is not a story about one depraved man. It's about an institution that learned to baptize its own sins, to wrap brutality in brocade, and to keep meticulous records of everything it claimed never happened. The documents survived. That's the miracle and the curse. Ledgers kept by Vatican secretaries. Dispatches written in cipher by Venetian ambassadors who could barely believe what they were witnessing. And above all, the diary of Johannes Burchard, master of ceremonies to the Pope. A German cleric whose job was to choreograph the sacred and who ended up chronicling the profane with the dispassion of a mortician. Burchard didn't editorialize. He didn't need to. His Latin is surgical. On the evening of October 30th, 1501, 50 women were brought to the Apostolic Palace. They were ordered to crawl naked among candles arranged on the floor, collecting chestnuts with their mouths, while the Pope, his daughter, and his son observed and awarded prizes to those who coupled most enthusiastically with the servants. You read that correctly. The Pope, his children, judges at a competition of humiliation held in the private apartments adjacent to the Sistine Chapel. But let's pull back. Because this didn't begin with Rodrigo Borgia, it began 5 centuries earlier, when the papacy was less a spiritual office and more a contested warlord's throne. Pope John XII, who reigned in the 10th century, was accused by his own bishops of turning the Lateran Palace into a brothel, of toasting to the devil, and of invoking pagan gods during dice games. Liutprand of Cremona, a chronicler with no love for John, wrote that the Pope died of a stroke while in bed with a married woman, her husband. Some said, having caught them and delivered divine justice with a hammer. Medieval polemicists loved a good papal scandal, so we must read Liutprand with caution. But archaeological records don't lie. Excavations of the Lateran complex uncovered separate residential quarters with luxurious furnishings, kitchen waste indicating banquets of astonishing scale, and most damningly peril records for female servants whose duties were never specified in writing, but whose wages matched those of concubines in noble households across Italy. The infrastructure of indulgence was already being built, brick by brick, receipt by receipt. What made the Renaissance popes different wasn't the sin. It was the bureaucracy. By the time Rodrigo Borgia bought his way onto the throne in 1492 and, yes, bought is the accurate verb, documented in ambassadorial letters that list the bribes. Cardinal by cardinal, the Vatican had become a machine designed to monetize everything, including shame. Offices were sold, benefices auctioned, indulgences became a revenue stream. And in that economy, bodies were simply another commodity. Rodrigo understood this with ruthless clarity. Before becoming pope, he had fathered at least 7 acknowledged children, possibly more. He elevated his son Cesare to cardinal at 18, not because Cesare had a vocation, but because a red hat was a tool, a way to funnel church revenues into Borgia military campaigns. He married his daughter Lucretia 3 times, each marriage a political transaction, each annulment a masterclass in papal legal gymnastics. When Lucretia's second husband became inconvenient, He was strangled and is sick. The assassin was almost certainly Cesa. The Pope expressed public grief and private satisfaction. But the marriages and murders, grotesque as they were just statecraft. What happened inside the apostolic palace was something else entirely. The Venetian ambassador Marino Sanuto recorded rumors he dared not fully believe that the Pope kept a harem within the Vatican. That Cardinal Cesare hosted orgies in his apartments and invited his father to watch. That Lucretia was not just a pawn, but a participant. Her beauty weaponized in negotiations with visiting dignitaries who left Rome compromised and compliant. Other ambassadors wrote similar accounts, their letters stamped with wax seals that betrayed trembling hands. They knew they were documenting the unthinkable. Then there's Burchard's diary. On All Saints' Day, 1500, he describes a bullfight held in the courtyard of the Vatican, followed by a banquet where courtesans performed acts which modesty forbids me to detail, while prelates in full vestments applauded. Later that same month, the chestnut game, the event modern historians call the Joust of Whores, took place with the Pope himself awarding a silk cloak and a pair of shoes to the woman judged most vigorous in her performance. Why would Burchard write this down? He was a creature of the institution, a man whose entire career depended on papal favor. Yet he recorded these events in the same ledger where he noted the proper arrangement of candlesticks for Easter Mass. Perhaps he believed someone, someday, would need to know. Perhaps he was documenting his own silent scream. Here's the question that haunts every historian who touches these sources. How many women in those accounts had a choice? How many were daughters of noble families sent to secure a favor, their silence purchased with a dowry or a convent cell? How many were servants who understood that refusal meant destitution, or worse? The Borgia court operated on a simple principle. Everything could be bought, and everyone could be bought. When a cardinal died suddenly, and they did, with suspicious frequency during Alexander VI's reign, his wealth reverted to the papacy. Contemporaries whispered about a special wine served only to those the Pope wished to inherit from, a vintage flavored with arsenic compounds known to Borgia alchemists. Modern toxicology can't confirm this. The bodies are dust, but the pattern is undeniable. Wealthy cardinal dines with the Pope. Wealthy cardinal dies within a week. Wealthy cardinals' estates are liquidated, and the funds appear in accounts used to finance Caesare's armies or Lucretia's dowry. Cesare Borgia himself deserves a moment of focus because he represents the ultimate corruption of holy office. Appointed cardinal as a teenager, he abandoned the red hat at 23 to become a warlord. Machiavelli met him, studied him, and used him as the model for the prince or ruler who understood that cruelty, used efficiently, could be a form of mercy. Cesare conquered the Romagna with a combination of betrayal, siege, and psychological terror. He invited rival condottieri to a peace banquet in Senigallia, then had them strangled one by one in a locked room. He married a French princess for political alliance, then abandoned her when the alliance soured. His own father granted him dispensations to break vows, annul contracts, seize lands. And all of this, the wars, the murders, the strategic marriages, was funded by the sale of church offices and the confiscation of wealth from clergy who died too conveniently. The fiscal records exist. The Vatican's Fondo Pio archives contain ledgers with entries like special charity to Cardinal X's family, followed by marginal notes in different ink. For silence, these aren't interpretations. They're receipts. Lucretia Borgia's story is more ambiguous and perhaps more tragic. She was 13 at her first wedding, 17 when her second husband was murdered, 21 when she was married for the third and final time to Alfonso d'Este, Duke of Ferrara. In Ferrara, away from Rome, she became a patron of artists and poets. She corresponded with intellectuals. Her letters reveal a sharp mind navigating impossible constraints. But she was also a Borgia, and she knew how the system worked. When her father needed her beauty to close a deal, she smiled. When her brother needed her silence about a murder, she stayed silent. Was she a victim or an accomplice? The document suggests she was both, and that the question itself reveals how the Borgia machine destroyed moral categories. Pope Alexander VI died in August 1503, possibly of malaria, possibly of poison intended for a rival cardinal, but consumed by mistake. His body decomposed so rapidly in the summer heat that servants refused to touch it. Burchard records that they used a plank to shove the corpse into a coffin too small to hold it, breaking bones to make it fit. No crowds came to mourn. Romans celebrated in the streets. But here's the detail that should chill you. Within hours of Alexander's death, Caesar's soldiers occupied the papal apartments and seized the treasury. They took everything: coins, jewels, documents, and then they began burning papers. Ledgers went into the flames. Letters were torn and scattered. The Borgias knew what was written down. They knew what would be found. And in those frantic hours, they tried to erase the paper trail of their own depravity. They failed. Enough survived. Burchard's diary was hidden and preserved. Ambassadors' letters had already been sent home to Venice, Milan, and Spain, copied into state archives beyond Borgia reach. Notaries who had witnessed contracts and recorded payments kept their own notes, and those notes filtered into monastic libraries, municipal records, private collections. The Archive won. The truth, partial and fragmentary but undeniable, outlasted the men who tried to bury it. But we must ask, why did the system allow this? Why didn't cardinals revolt, bishops object, congregations rebel? The answer lies in the same documents that record the abuses. The Borgia papacy was an empire built on complicity. Cardinals who objected found themselves reassigned to distant dioceses or dead. Bishops who preached reform were accused of heresy. Families who resisted were destroyed financially, their property seized under legal pretexts manufactured by Vatican lawyers. And then there were the benefits. If you played along, wealth flowed. A nephew could be made bishop. A daughter could marry into nobility. A business rival could be excommunicated, his contracts nullified. The Borgia court rewarded loyalty with tangible power and punished dissent with ruin. Most people chose survival. This is the machine that Martin Luther would confront a decade later, though Alexander VI would be dead by then. Luther's 95 Theses weren't just about indulgences, they were about a church that had learned to monetize salvation and sacralize greed. The Reformation's fury was fed by memories of the Borgia years, by stories parents told children about the Pope who turned the Vatican into a pleasure palace while claiming to hold the keys to heaven. The Renaissance gave us Michelangelo's ceiling, Raphael's Madonnas, the architectural wonder of St. Peter's Basilica. It also gave us Alexander VI, a man who commissioned Pinturicchio to paint frescoes of saints in his private apartments while hosting competitions of degradation in the rooms below. The same hands that funded beauty funded brutality. The same gold that gilded altars paid for poison. That contradiction is the Renaissance in a single breath. So what do we do with this history? We can't unsee it. We can't pretend that the sacred is automatically pure, or that institutions built on moral authority are immune to corruption. The documents force us to sit with an uncomfortable truth. Power doesn't corrupt because bad people seek it. Power corrupts because systems designed to concentrate authority create conditions where abuse becomes efficient, profitable, and sustainable. The women crawling for chestnuts, the cardinals dying of convenient illnesses, the families selling silence to protect their names, these aren't anomalies. They're features of a system that had learned to function without accountability. And the most damning detail of all, the men who orchestrated this performed Mass every Sunday. They blessed congregations. They claimed to speak for God. Johannes Burchard died in 1506, 3 years after the Pope he served. He requested burial in a simple tomb. On it, no grand epitaph, just his name and the dates. But his diary survived him, and that survival was its own epitaph. He had witnessed what he could not stop, so he wrote it down. He made it a record. He turned silence into testimony. The archive doesn't scream, it whispers. But if you lean in close enough, if you read the marginalia and the crossed-out entries and the letters sealed with wax that cracked centuries ago, you hear it. You hear the voices of people who knew they were living through something monstrous and chose to leave evidence for us. They knew we would come looking. They knew we would need to know. And now you know. The question is, what do you do with it?